Hi guys, so this is just kind of a close-up of our inequalities section of the second half of this unit. So inequalities are a lot like equations, but they have solution sets. So I can graph the solution set of an inequality on a number line. I can solve inequalities using the standard procedure, and I can use what I know about inequalities to solve real-world problems. So the first thing is to just graph the solution set. And I just want to remind you that if it has a line underneath the inequality, that means it's going to be a closed circle. So I need a closed circle on 5, and this says x is less than or equal to 5. If you remember the trick that my student teacher taught me a lot of years ago, it tells me that the arrow is going to go this direction. So it's going to cover all the numbers that are less than or equal to 5. The next one says x is less than 5 halves. Well, for me to be able to do this effectively, I'm going to have to change 5 halves into a decimal. So 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. So I know I'm going to have an open circle on 2.5, which is going to be halfway between 2 and 3. All right, and I know that it's less than, so it's going to be all the numbers going this direction. And remember that trick of drawing your arrow. All right, the next one says x is greater than 7. So I'm going to have an open dot on 7 because there's no line underneath. And my arrow is going to go that direction because x is greater than 7. Okay, x is greater than or equal to negative 4.2. Well, I know that negative 4.2 is actually going to be between 4 and 5, closer to 4 than 5. And I know x is greater than, so it's going to go this direction. Then I want to check, and it's got to be a closed circle because there's a line underneath my inequality. So that tells me it's going to be a closed circle. My arrow can extend all the way because there are no parameters telling me that it can't. All right, so now they want me to select all the inequalities that have the same graph as x is less than 4. So that's not going to be x is less than 2 because when I draw my graph, that's going to include number 3, and the graph of x is less than 2 is not going to include that. So if I have x plus 6 is less than 10, subtract 6 on each side to create that 0 pair. X is less than 4. So B will be correct. The next one, I've got 5x is less than 20. Divide by 5 on each side. X is going to be less than 4. Again, C is going to be correct. Then I have x minus 2 is greater than 2. Add 2 to each side. X is greater than 4. Well, that inequality makes a big difference because it would change the direction of my arrow. So D is out. And E is also out because if it's is less than 8, that would include numbers 5, 6, and 7, which I can't include in this graph. So that means it's just B and C. Select all the values that make x true. Okay, so negative x plus 6 is greater than 10. We want to see if it's going to be true. So I'm going to need my handy-dandy calculator, or I can use my handy-dandy brain, whichever works better. So if you're not real comfortable with your integer rules yet, we're going to keep working on those. So a negative times a negative is going to be a positive. So that means that tells me 3.9 plus 6 is greater than or equal to 10. Well, that's not true because that's going to be 9.9 and that's not greater. Let's try the next one. Negative 4, because a negative times a positive. So I have a negative 4 plus 6 is greater than or equal to 10. So that would be 2 is not greater than or equal to 10. So B is out. All right. C, we have a negative times a negative, so that's going to make a positive. 4.01 plus 6 is greater than or equal to 10. Well, that's going to be 10.01, and that is greater than. Okay. let's try D. So a negative times a negative is going to make a positive. So I've got 4 plus 6 is greater than or equal to 10. Well, 10 is equal to 10. That line down there tells me I can use that. All right, a positive times a negative is going to be a negative 4.01 plus 6 is greater than or equal to 10. Oops, sorry, that should be 6. There you go. So when I subtract that, I get 1.99, and that's not going to be greater than or equal to 10. So E is out. All right, let's try the next one. So 3.9. So negative 3.9 plus 6 is greater than or equal to 10. Well, when I subtract that, I get 6 minus 3.9, 2.1, and that's not going to be greater than or equal to 10. So F is out. 0. Well, negative 0, there's no such thing. It's just 0 plus 6 is greater than or equal to 10. So that's also not true. Negative 7, so a negative times a negative is going to be a positive. Positive 7 plus 6, well, that's going to be 13, and 13 is greater than or equal to 10, so H. So it should have been C, D, and H. All right, which inequality is true when the value of x is negative 3? Well, I'm just going to have to try them all out. So a negative times a negative is going to make a positive. So is 3 minus 6 less than negative 3.5? Well, 3 minus 6 is going to be negative 3, and that's not less than negative 3.5. Okay, because negative 3 is closer to 0. Think about it as in if it was 3 degrees below 0, it would be warmer than it was if it was negative 3.5 degrees below 0. So the next one, we have a negative times a negative, so that's a positive. So we end up with negative 3 is greater than 3.5. Well, that's not true because it's a positive 3.5. So let's try C. So we have 3 minus 6 again, so that leaves me with negative 3 is greater than negative 3.5. I think we have a winner. That is true. Negative 3 is warmer than negative 3.5. Let's try the last one. So that would just be negative 3 minus 6. So we add the opposite. So that would be negative 9. Negative 9 is not greater than negative 3.5. If it was negative 9 degrees outside, it would be colder than negative 3.5. So C should have been my answer. All right, for every $9 that Elena earns, she gives X dollars away to charity. This happens 7 times this month. Elena wants to be sure that she keeps at least $42 from this month's earnings. Okay, so I'm going to start with my distributive property. So 7 times 9 is 63. 7 times minus X is minus 7X. Is greater than or equal to 42. So I'm going to subtract 63 on each side. It's going to be okay that I'm going to end up with a negative here. So I get rid of my 0 pair, and I have negative 7x is greater than or equal to 63 minus 42, 21, and it's going to be a negative because the sign of the larger absolute value is negative. So then remember, when you divide by that negative 7, you flip the direction of your inequality. So that means that x is going to be less than or equal to 3. So x has to be less than or equal to 3 so that this works out. For For the next one, it says, Lynn buys a candle that is 9 inches tall. She burns X inches per minute. She wants to let the candle burn for 7 minutes until it is less than 6 inches tall. So we have 9 minus 7x is less than 6. So we're going to subtract 9 on each side to create that zero pair. So we're left with negative 7x is less than negative 3. Now when we divide by that negative 7, we're left with x. We have to flip the inequality. So x has to be greater than 3/7. Okay? Or you could divide that in your calculator, 3 divided by 7. And you're going to get 0.42857. It's going to be crazy. So that's going to be your answer. So when you divide by a negative, so I divided by a negative, you flip the inequality. So then your cool down, it says select all the inequalities that have the same solution as negative 4x is less than 20. I'm reminding you that when you divide by a negative, you need to flip that inequality.